Hey, everybody. I'm Paul Grand, CEO here at MedTech Innovator. Welcome to another one of our episodes in the MedTech Innovator live webinar series. For those of you who haven't been here before, MedTech Innovator is an accelerator. We focus on more downstream companies. We try to find companies that are up and running, that have technology, that are on the path to going to market. Maybe they're already on the market, but they still have the opportunity to benefit from an access to stakeholders in our industry, people who are experts. We bring together the world's leading experts with the world's leading startups. And that's what this webinar series is about. Today, we're going to be talking about FDA and more specifically, things like breakthrough device designation and the payer communication task force and what that's all about, amongst other things. So it's going to be a fun hour here. At the end of the hour, the MedTech Innovator cohort gets to do live Q&A with our panelists. Those of you who are joining us on YouTube, you're not going to be here for those last 30 minutes, but you get to see the first hour. If you have any questions, put a message in the little chat box over here on the side, and one of my team members will relay that to me. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about FDA today. This is not going to be a 101 style seminar on the FDA. It's going to be very specific in some areas that really have to do in how FDA is helping to advance commercialization, especially post-approval or post-clearance for technologies. How do we get those technologies to patients faster, or what we call patient access? So we're going to talk about that today. We've got three panelists who are going to be representing a couple different viewpoints. We'll be talking more from a little bit from the payer side and how they think. We'll be talking to FDA about how they work. And then one of our companies, one of our alumni who's been through this process is also here to join us. So first, let me start with the payer side, or someone who kind of represents that side of things a bit. So Lena Chyhorsky. Lena, you want to tell us about yourself, your company briefly, and a little bit about what you do in this space.
Sure, Paul, and thanks so much. Great to be here, and thank you for having me. My name is Lena Chyhorsky. I'm the co-founder and vice president of Payer Innovation at a company called Alva10. Alva10 is, it's a precision medicine brokerage. We partner pre-commercial diagnostic companies that are developing really high-value, exciting diagnostics with insurance companies, carriers, employers, PBMs, specialty pharmacies, to ensure that the diagnostic that is being developed has optimal clinical and economic utility for the payer, and that it is performing the right function and it is developing the right level of evidence to be able to get covered and reimbursed. So this is how we are working to overturn really what has been the dramatic problem in the diagnostic industry. I would also argue in the device industry, which is a completely unclear threshold as to the level of evidence required for coverage. So great to be here today. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for being here, Lena. Really, really excited to have this discussion with you. Let's move on then to our next panelist. So Murray Sheldon, Associate Director of Technology and Innovation at CDRH and a longtime participant in MedTech Innovator's various webinars and meetings. So Murray, great to have you back.
Thanks, Paul. This is Murray Sheldon. Can you hear me? I hope so. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're located across the country or across the world. I'm very honored to be here. I've worked with Paul and MedTech Innovator for many years. I think they're a great operation, and I'm glad to help out and give you a little idea about how we work, especially with regards to patient access. I'm currently the Associate Director for Technology and Innovation in the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health. I've been working there for about eight and a half years, and I run and manage the Payer Communication Task Force. But before joining FDA, I was trained as a heart surgeon and practiced cardiac surgery in a robust community in California for over 20 years. And then I pivoted and started developing medical devices, mostly in small venture capital-based companies, and in fact, had very little interaction with FDA, if any at all. I followed the paradigm that many of you may still be used to, or your older friends were used to, of going to Europe first before coming to the US. And that's what I did. And so I was a little bit surprised when FDA reached out and talked to me about coming to FDA to work as the Associate Director for Technology and Innovation. And I think the issue was that they had recognized that they hadn't done everything exactly right. And we were all traveling to Europe, and they wanted to figure out how they can change that so that patients in the US have access to high quality, safe, and effective medical devices of public health importance first in the world, because that wasn't happening. The good news is it's happening now. Welcome, and I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Murray. Great having you back. I can say, from my experience, there's no question. You're right. It's happening. And we're hearing it even on the other side. We'll talk more about this later. We're hearing it from people in Europe and the UK who are going, yeah, we've seen a big downturn in the number of early companies that are trying to launch here first and doing their studies here first, because it's working better back in the US. So we'll talk more about that later, but great job, Murray. All right, so let's move on then to Shyam. So Shyam Natarajan is one of our alumni here at MedTech Innovator. He's founder and CEO at Avenda Health, and has had some experience with this process. So Shyam, you want to just introduce yourself, tell us a little about your company, and then we can get into the panel.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Paul, and to the MedTech Innovator team for having me here today. I'm Shyam Natarajan. I'm co-founder and CEO of Avenda Health. We were a accelerator company in 2017, probably one of the youngest accelerator companies in medtech history, about 3 weeks old when we joined. But Avenda Health is focused on treating prostate cancer while preserving quality of life. We're FDA cleared with our first product via breakthrough device designation for a prostate cancer specific therapy, which is exciting because this has not been granted. This indication has not been granted in about 40 years. And we have probably applied to every innovation program within the FDA. We applied to parallel path review. We applied to, there was a program to submit your work in PDF rather than in paper back a couple of years ago. We've been working with the FDA since 2014, 3 years before the company started. So I have great respect and admiration for how the FDA has operated, and look forward to being part of this panel. Thank you.
Great having you here, Shyam. That's why I chose you to be on the panel today. So thank you for being here, all three of you. So let's start off first and set the stage a little bit about some of the initiatives that FDA has had in recent years to help medtech companies in bridging that gap between market authorization and commercialization of the product. And specifically, as I mentioned, making sure that, payment and these things are happening. That's certainly part of all this. And I know, Murray, you've got some slides for us. So if you want me to load those up, we can start off with that, and you can kind of walk us through a little bit of that work, and then we can lead into a discussion. Does that sound good?
That'd be great. That'd be great. If you can put them up, I can help give a little background.
That sounds terrific. Let's do that. So here's your slides. So whenever you want to start.
Great. Let's go on to the next slide. Give me a second. My computer jumped to, there we go. Great. Thank you. So today for the group, I'd like to discuss at least some of our regulatory programs and pathways. And I think probably some of the more controversial and or helpful ones are the Breakthrough Devices Program, as well as the STEP program. I'm not going to show any slides, but I'm very happy to talk about our Payer Communication Task Force programs, as well as other works with payers that we do, including CMS parallel review, as well as early payer feedback programs for private companies. Next slide. So we've been on this journey for nearly a decade now, beginning actually with the innovation pathway and the expedited access pathway predecessor programs, which essentially were pilots for the current Breakthrough Devices Program. But in 2016, Congress passed the 21st Century Cures Act, which provided the authority to establish the Breakthrough Program. The Breakthrough Program was fully defined in final guidance in 2018, and this was followed a year later with a proposed Safer Technologies Program for Class 2 moderate risk devices And the STEP program, as it's now called, was finalized with guidance earlier this year. Next slide. Now, accelerating patient access to groundbreaking devices hinges on working collaboratively with the agency and the device developer to solve problems together. It's a little bit different as how FDA used to work, in which we established silos with high walls, and each side had catapults and would load their information and send it over the wall. One side would look at it and then make some comments, send it back. The other side would look at it and send it back, and there wouldn't be a whole lot of communication. So we changed the approaches based on our understanding and knowledge learned in the pilot programs of the Innovation Pathway and Expedited program. And Breakthrough was developed with multiple particular benefits. These include sprints, which are the highly interactive process, actually picking up the telephone and calling each other, a data development plan that we would work together to capture additional data as time would go on. It would also give the opportunity perhaps to approve a product to go on the market with greater uncertainty in the pre-market and rely on further data gathering in the post-market for the ultimate designation of approval that the product showed a reasonable assurance of safety and efficacy. So the standards didn't change. This also allowed us efficiencies and flexibility in our study design, prioritization of review, and often inclusion of a senior staff member who had particular experience in Breakthrough. Next slide. So how do you get eligible to get Breakthrough designation? Well, the first criteria is that it needs to be either for diagnostic or treatment of a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating conditions. So this is a very, very specific aspect, and it's generally for devices that initially were subject to PMAs and de novos, but with 21st century cures, 510Ks included that as well. But remember criteria number one. It's for life-threatening and irreversibly debilitating conditions. And the reason that I emphasize that is that patients need those types of diagnostic or therapeutic devices if they have those types of conditions. So it's a methodology to get products to patient access to the right products to the right patients at the right time. Next slide. And the second criteria that you must meet is that the device offers significant advantages over existing alternatives, or for a completely unmet need where no alternative exists. We know that when we designate a device as Breakthrough, we believe it has the potential to provide for more effective treatment or diagnosis, but has a limited data set. The Breakthrough program is developed to enable the development of a more comprehensive data set in partnership with the developer. By statute, FDA has 60 days to finalize our decision to designate a device as Breakthrough. Next. And this just shows a fairly wide diversity of the device types that have been designated as Breakthrough. This slide's a little bit out of date. It goes back to earlier this year, but as you can see, there's quite a few designations, 417 as of this date, with the areas that dominate in the field of cardiovascular or neurology and other places. But these are just designations. What's most important is that these devices eventually achieve market authorization. And by March 31st, we had 23, again, highlighting cardiovascular and neurology, but you can see the other areas that are also included. Next slide. Now, the STEP program is similar to Breakthrough, and there's been shown a lot of interest and a lot of promise. It fills a needed niche to bring impactful products to patients in a space not fully covered by breakthrough. It specifically targets improvements in the safety of a medical device and therefore improves the benefit risk profile. And specifically, these are for products that really do not qualify for breakthrough because it's not for life-threatening or irreversibly conditions. Next slide. And like breakthrough, there are two criteria for eligibility, with the first being that the device is not eligible for the breakthrough program. And the device should be expected to improve the benefit risk profile, as I mentioned, but other factors, A, B, C, and D, as you can read, are what we anticipate will be coming out of the STEP eligibility program. And this program relies on interactions and collaboration, again, between the company and FDA, often in real time, to bring important products as quickly as we can to patients. Next slide. And I've listed on here for everybody, and these slides are public and you can distribute them, some of the resources and the guidances for the Breakthrough Devices Program, the Safer Technologies Program, or STEP, as well as, no, I don't have any of our contact numbers, but Paul, we can put a contact number for the Payer Communication Task Force as well. Last slide. Well, thanks for this opportunity to give you an overview of some of the FDA programs that we hope will serve the medical device community as well as patients to improve public health. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Murray. Great presentation. Really helpful to set the stage for some of these programs. And quickly, you mentioned also the Payer Communication Task Force. So can you just briefly, since you didn't have slides on that, just tell us kind of what that is, and what its goals are, and then we'll get into some of the details later.
Sure. So we recognized early on that even though you may have an approved product from FDA, in some cases, sometimes in many cases, insurance companies will not provide coverage. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the primary issues, at least when we talk about public payers such as CMS, there are different statutory requirements. But even if it's not statutory, the FDA will put a product on the market if it believes that there is a reasonable assurance of safety and efficacy. However, that is insufficient for a payer in general. Payers are looking for different things. Does it improve healthcare outcomes? Does it shorten hospital stays? Is this product better than another product out there and they'd rather pay for that? What is the cost effectiveness of this product compared to other products that are already on the market? And so the criteria are different. And often the product, even though it's FDA approved, will not get coverage. And frankly, unless it's very rare circumstance, if a product doesn't have insurance coverage, patients will simply not have access to that. And so that blocks our ability to meet our mission goal that patients in the US have access to these products first in the world. So in thinking about this, we recognize that the biggest gap was simply communication. And we also know that when companies are developing their medical products, they have to come to the FDA. So if you're coming to the FDA and we're going to talk to you, we want to instill in your mind the thought that this product needs to have some sort of payer coverage. And how do you understand what that is? Communication. So we put companies in touch with a variety of payers, public and private. We've spoken to them in advance. These companies are willing to do this and to help educate the companies as to what are their criteria and to review their developing clinical trials to be sure that the data that's being developed for FDA will also include often different data that a payer then needs and can then look at to give coverage, a determination. The worst possible case is that a company, generally innovations coming from small venture-backed companies with not a lot of money, often not a lot of products, they spend all their money and they have a great product. They get FDA approval, and the insurance says, well, you didn't get this piece of data and you didn't get that piece of data. We can't provide you coverage. Do this other clinical trial to capture that data. That'll take 5 more years and another $30 million. And that sinks the company and it hurts the patient. So getting together early to get a perfect understanding of what you'll need for both FDA and payers is the goal of the Payer Communication Task Force.
Excellent overview and an explanation of that, Murray. We've seen the exact same thing. It's something I talk about constantly here at MedTech Innovator, and lots of people in our ecosystem keep using those words, talk early and talk often to us, hear it from FDA, hear from everybody, because this is the only way to avoid that problem that you described, where people they raise capital and they say, oh, I just need 3 million to get to FDA clearance or approval, or 5 million or 10 million or whatever the number is. And investors like, great. And they get to that milestone and then they're like back in the back of the line again. And you got to go through this whole new process, and investors, they bail. They go, well, that's not what I didn't sign up for another 5 years of this before this is going to get to patients. And so there's a lot of things that, that come with that early and often. Talk to payers early, involve them in this process. So it isn't a linear, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, whatever. A lot of these things can be done at the same time. So to that end, I want to bring Lena into the conversation, and Sham, you can sit back for a minute. But let me bring Lena in. So Lena, I know you've been in front of the Payer Communication Task Force, and you've part of this before. Again, I know you work on the diagnostic side more, I think, in that respect. But can you share a little bit from that side? What's been some of your experience in this process? And we can get, after that initial commentary, then we can talk a little bit, maybe some tips as well. So why don't we start with you on experience?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, the company, and I'm not going to speak in specifics, but the company that I have in mind was actually a device company that went up in front of the Payer Communication Task Force, and they kind of sit in our portfolio as a device that it substantially improves precision medicine in this particular sector, and that's why. So I think in general, my comments apply to diagnostics and devices equally, honestly, because frankly, in the set of the problem we're discussing, it's really the same problem, which is how much evidence is required for coverage, right? So the first thing I'll say is that I think FDA absolutely nailed it with putting together the Payer Communication Task Force. This is a problem that had been historically kind of spoken in circles for a long time, but had not really been dragged out into the public and stated, like, look, FDA approval takes millions of dollars and a lot of time, and it doesn't guarantee you any commercial coverage. And that's a huge problem for innovators, right? Because you are making an enormous investment up front. And then at the end of the day, like Murray said, you're not actually getting the ball across the finish line, right? In terms of coverage and patient access. So the Payer Communication Task Force, when in the context, I would say, of the company that brought us the most lessons around this, had put together a very thoughtful conference call with a couple commercial payers. So we submitted a very simple application. I would say it's a couple-page application, nothing more than that really describes the technology and what we're doing with the FDA and what we think the value is, what kind of evidence we have. And that really serves as a prompt, right, for the Payer Communication Task Force, which is really the FDA aggregator, right? That serves as a prompt for the FDA to send this information out to the commercial payers that are on the task force as a way of saying, this is a technology, is this something you'd be interested in working with us on, et cetera. And then those payers are able to say yes or no. And then the payers that end up on the call are the ones that have, already decided that they're interested enough to take this phone call, right? And a couple of the big key learnings for us, the first one I would say, and this was actually, the FDA also commented on this multiple times at the time, was to say the commercial payers are asking a lot of questions around economics. And that's interesting because the FDA doesn't ask questions around economics, right? We're talking about safety and efficacy here. And I think that that was a great window for FDA. And again, this was a couple of years ago, so the learnings may have substantially increased from then. But at the time, I think that was a really powerful point for FDA. And it was a powerful point for us because it really highlights how much companies are forced to provide economic data to commercial insurers. And it kind of explains why commercial insurers look at FDA approval and kind of say, meh, that's not the evidence we're looking for, right? So they asked a lot of questions around economics. And I think that was one big learning. And the second thing that was really highlighted was that as fantastic as the calls were, and they were tremendously helpful, the process of actually coming to consensus on the level of evidence required for coverage is still a question mark. I think that FDA has done what it is able to do within the realms of its jurisdiction to open these conversations. Alva-10, we are an organization that has created a commercial business model to solve this problem. There are policy levers that can be pulled to help solve this problem, but this is still an enormous challenge for innovators today is, well, how many conversations do I need to have? Who do I need to call? How many studies do I need to fund? What is the level of evidence required for coverage? So I do think that this is, I think that the program has tremendous potential still, and I would just focus. So those are the two big things: is the level of economic evidence. How are you developing economic evidence? How are you creating an economic value proposition to payers? And the fact that it's still unclear what level of evidence is required for coverage. I guess one other thing that I would say that was also a learning for us, and it was great that this was correct, but I have seen this go sideways in a lot of different companies, which is that at the end of the day, commercial payers are looking for clinical utility. They are making a judgment call on whether or not the level of evidence you're developing is showing them that if they use your product as compared to status quo, those patients will do better. And that is different, I would say. The FDA, and this is appropriate, isn't making comments on clinical utility, right? Because they're not ultimately paying for those outcomes, but the payers are. And so you can have a test that is beautifully validated. You can have a device that is beautifully validated. It does what you say it does. But if its use is not the driving lever that is improving patient outcomes, that is something that the FDA would not call out, but commercial payers will. And I think a lot of companies tend to fall into that gap during the product development process.
Paul, could I
Please.
tack on one last thing for what Lena, you're completely correct, especially about the lack of transparency of what's really needed from the payer. Certainly from the FDA side, it's easier for us because a company has to show that the product is safe. That's relatively easy. You look at adverse reactions, that it's not killing people, it's not hurting people, it's not causing untoward consequences, and that it's effective. And being effective, it's just, as you said, it's doing what it says it's going to do. If you're having a product that lowers blood pressure, you demonstrate that it lowers blood pressure. But the question is, what's the clinical consequence of that? And at least on the CMS side, they are also bound by certain rules. And one is the definition of coverage is that a product is reasonable and necessary for the Medicare beneficiaries. Now, I'll tell you, there has been at least 4 attempts to define what is reasonable and what is necessary. And the reality is they've failed 4 times, and we still don't have an actual definition of what is reasonable and what's necessary. So that plays a role, at least in part, in terms of the obtuseness of what is it that payers really want. But I think you hit it on the head. They're really looking at clinical health outcomes. Does the patient get better with this drug, and better in what way, or with this device, and in comparison to others as well?
Thanks, Murray. And I think it's so important, kind of, again, to understand this distinction that FDA, is doing one thing, and then coverage and payment, that is a separate thing. But you've recognized, as you pointed out, that bringing that conversation early is going to allow people to collect both data sets. So you get what you need for safety and effectiveness, and all the things that roll into that, and human factors, et cetera. And also you get economic data, you get the understanding of what kind of economic data is needed so that you can run those additional data collection points and have that data so you can present a complete package, if you will, at the end of this process. And I know that there's the elephant in the room is certainly MSIT and that program, which is now on hold or repealed or however we want to use the terminology. But the point is that there's been lots of different ways that we're trying to get at the same thing. And I want to make sure the audience today, whether it's our companies or those who are listening on Zoom, understand that this payer communication task force is a real thing. It's something that's really benefiting companies. And whether or not there's an MSIT or not, there's a lot of value in being part of that. And so what I want to do now is bring Sham into the conversation. And Sham, you're one of our companies who's had breakthrough designation and been working with the Payer Communication Task Force. So can you just tell us again a little about your experience in that process, and then we'll talk more after that.
Yeah, happy to, Paul. I think for us, the reason we approached CMS and other payers early in the process is primarily not just understanding the economics, that's going to satisfy their needs for coverage, but also we are working in a disease state, in a space where getting overall survival, metastasis-free survival, a type of cancer, well-accepted cancer endpoints really is not possible within a realistic time frame. This could be 10, 15, 20 years to get some of those conventional endpoints for a clinical trial. And thus, we were working in a disease state where there has not been any sort of new innovation on the specific indication for a very long time. And the FDA, to their credit, has done a lot of work in the last 5 to 10 years, pulling together key opinion leaders. The societies have been getting involved, trying to determine what is an appropriate intermediate endpoint for a long-term cancer study that is going to show that effectiveness of this or efficacy of a new cancer treatment. And so our aim was, with the Payer Communication Task Force, was to bring in payers early into the process. FDA has done a lot of work. They held workshops. They've published papers and guidance documents talking about what they would like to see, really bringing the payers and getting them on the same page and getting them on board. And really, this was a way for us, not only for us to state our case and to educate the payers on what we were trying to do, but also for the FDA to educate the payers on what all of the work that has been done to date. And so when we spend a lot of money, as Paul said before, doing a large clinical study, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that it's worthwhile for both payers and the FDA. So what we did, our first step really was to contact the appropriate liaison, within the FDA. First, I'd say the FDA is much more responsive, and I believe they're the ones driving these programs. And they were able to put us in touch with payers. Essentially, there's a list on their website, which you can see all of the payers that have agreed to participate in the program. It's almost like an email type of application. It's not very hard. It's very straightforward. But before we did that, we actually saw the Parallel Path Review Program, which is a slightly different program than the Payer Communication Task Force. That is a program where the endpoint is actually an NCD, a National Care Determination with CMS, so that at the end of the road, you're getting FDA clearance or approval, as well as national coverage at the same time or within a very short time frame. So we applied to that program first. The FDA and people in part of the Parallel Review Program really reached out to us and said, you don't want to do that program at your stage. That's typically for for companies, at a very later stage, with the clinical trial nearly complete, with all the data in hand, because you don't want to go down this path, have somebody assess a national care determination coverage decision with like incomplete or half data, and then make it really bad for you down the line. So you should really look at payer communication task force. And then really, we were able to bring Kaiser, a representative from Kaiser, to that pre-sub meeting with the FDA. We actually got 90 minutes on a pre-sub, which was pretty good. This was in person back when we all had in-person meetings. And then after that pre-sub, which was very helpful in educating all the relevant parties, the FDA actually put us in touch with additional payers. And so it's not just like sort of a one and done type of program. It's like like in any submission process, it's not like you talk to the FDA once, cool, you get your answer, and then I don't want to hear from you until I submit the final package. It's an ongoing dialogue. And so what we were able to do is get Kaiser as part of that pre-sub. We reached out to CMS. We actually got connected to NICE, which is the UK healthcare assessor. Even though we had no plans on launching in Europe or UK now, but it was helpful to get connections with medical directors as well as key stakeholders in the payer community and get their thoughts and their feedback, so that when we do our large trial, which is going to be a randomized control trial for an eventual PMA application, we're not collecting the wrong kind of data, but also we're getting everybody on board with our endpoints and our comparator. And I think that's equally or even more important when you're trying to like push the field and do something really novel here.
That's great. And I'm going to let others comment in a second. I just want to make a point again for anyone who's watching or listening or here in the Zoom. I want to make sure you're getting kind of the understanding that there is, and we'll go into some more specifics in a minute, there is a program that FDA is helping to manage that will connect you to payers. And I hear all the time from companies, they say to us, like, how do I get in touch with payers? And when can I get in touch with payers, or who should I email to get in touch with the payer? And you, as you're hearing, this is pre-sub stage stuff. You don't have to be way down the road and all these things. Like, you can do this super early on. And this is something that FDA just offers. And you're not paying extra for that per se, right? There's no extra fee. Is there, Murray, for doing this?
There's no fee for working with the Payer Communication Task Force whatsoever. However, there are a couple of payers who, if they do get engaged with a company to really work through their clinical trial and to give them some definitive answers about what type of data, they will charge a fee for that service. It's kind of like an HTA, health technology assessment approach that you may or may not want to do.
So, you pointed out something earlier, Sham. There's a question from YouTube, so I'm just going to address it really quickly, which is someone was asking if there's any significant payers who are not on the communications task force. I don't want to get into those answers in detail, but I do want to just tell you, whoever's listening and asking that question, just go to the website, on the FDA website, Google, you'll find it. And there's a list. So you can look down the list and you can see who's there. And that'll give you that answer. So let me go back to the conversation here then. So Sham, thanks for giving a little bit of that. It answered one of the questions that I was going to ask, which is, again, when is the right time to reach out about the Payer Communication Task Force? Lena, you said it's pretty easy. It's just a couple pages of information you have to supply. Is there like a whole strategy? Do you need an Alva 10 to do this? Do you, and again, is it, just give me a little more on that, and what's involved. And by the way, I'm advocating for people to use companies like Alva 10, but my point is, how complicated is it to at least make this initial request?
It's not complicated. And as much as we at Alva 10 love working with innovator companies, I also don't want to overrepresent how complicated it is. I think the FDA made it simple and simple for a reason. So I would say, definitely email the Payer Communication Task Force, take a look at that application, see, how good your story is. And I think this is also a great opportunity to flesh out your story at this stage in your development process. And then if you feel like that story is missing chapters, or you feel like like it might not come across as compelling as you would like, then I think that's a great opportunity to engage us, to engage others, and help with that piece. But the process is made simple, and I think that's really for a reason. I think this is really an underutilized program within the FDA. I'll say something else too, which is that I think if more companies used it, I think that also would help show commercial insurers, because I think it would give the FDA that boost to go to commercial insurance and commercial insurers and say, guys, we're getting a lot of companies coming through this channel. We need more engagement, and really push on the commercial insurer industry. This is an industry that historically commercial insurers have historically been set up to evaluate drugs, not diagnostics and devices. They, when you think about the amount of money they pay out and for what, right? They are paying money out for therapeutic pathways. And I think it's safe to say that a lot of the diagnostic and device industry is given maybe shorter shrift, and that the MedTech committees that make coverage policy decisions are very different from the formulary committees, from the pharmacy committees. So it would say it's less of a known process, and it needs to become a much better known process. So I think that the more device companies, the more diagnostic companies walk through the payer communication task force, the more commercial insurance is going to feel this pressure of, we really need to be communicating to these companies what's required for coverage if we want to continue seeing impactful innovation make it to patient care.
And let me point out one more thing too. Thank you, Lena, which is that you don't have to be a breakthrough device to go through the payer communication task force. Anyone can do it, right? There's no requirements or no other. If you're applying to FDA, if you're going to go through that pathway, you can request being part of this process. Is that correct?
You don't have to have any type of product. It will take class 1 to class 3. Don't have to be part of any other program. All you need is to have an interest to communicate with payers in advance of developing your data.
Right. And that's why, again, I'm pointing out in relation to MSIP, which I think is so interesting, is that if you go into it and you say, I'm just going to apply for breakthrough designation, and then I'll be immediately covered, which was kind of the dream a lot of companies have had in this last year or so. But this is at least from my perspective, I'd much rather know what the payers want from the beginning. And it's not just about Medicaid and Medicare. It's all these other commercial payers, and making sure that you understand what they're looking for. To me, that's the best way to go about this. So I think that's really interesting. Again, we've addressed the timing. It's early. It's pretty simple. Go through and apply. So if you don't mind, I'm going to back. Oh, sorry, Shyam. Yes.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make one comment, and I think this is pretty important for all the entrepreneurs in the audience, that, as the entrepreneur, I think consultants and folks like Alva10 are very helpful in guiding and navigating through the process. Although I feel very strongly that you as the entrepreneur should take that initiative to read through the guidance documents, to reach out to the FDA or payers yourself. Remember, these are all human beings. They're all individuals. They're not this monolithic organization. And it's important to just do your own effort and do your own work here, because at the end of the day, you know your product the best.
Agreed. Thank you, Shyam, for that. And by the way, same thing, we encourage everybody. We don't tell people, go to the FDA by yourself, don't work with a consultant, you don't need that. We don't tell people only work with consultants. We tell people, look, you need to own and understand this process as well. You want to have the best people in your corner who are helping you through this process, which is why we partner people up with best of breed service providers in MedTech Innovator, because that's what we're trying to do here, is make sure that you have the best possible chance of success, and you need great people in your corner for that. So we're glad we've got you here, Lena, to represent on that. And thanks, Shyam, for that comment. Let me go back to Murray. So we only have 15 minutes left before the end of the live broadcast, and then we'll still have 30 minutes for Q&A at the end with our companies. But let's back up here for a moment and talk a little bit, again, going back to breakthrough, Murray, if you don't mind. So some of the questions I know that people are always still asking out there is breakthrough designation worth it? And, I know there's a period where there's all sorts of people who've been saying, for years, like, hey, this is fantastic, fantastic. If you qualify for breakthrough, you should be applying for it. Do you mind just summing up very quickly, Murray, what, from your perspective, are kind of the key benefits to a company for breakthrough device designation? Why should they do it?
Sure. So when you ask the question, is breakthrough worth it? You first have to ask the question, is your device qualified for breakthrough? In other words, is it really for a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating condition? And if so, is it better than what's already out there, or is it just a me too, another one? So breakthrough is really designed to get new innovative products that to meet unmet needs, whatever those unmet needs may be. Now, once you get breakthrough, what are the advantages? Well, the first obvious advantage to a company is often funding. When a company is granted breakthrough designation, they often have greater ability to raise funds because they've gone to FDA and FDA has said, yes, this is breakthrough technology. But what else happens? Well, you get priority review. That can't hurt because your product moves along a little bit quicker. You often get a senior manager on your case to get a look at it. But most importantly, is we can take advantage of what we call the pre-post-market balance. Now, for all products, the law states that FDA should always consider balancing how much data needs to be collected in the pre-market versus in the post-market, and we consider product development a total product life cycle, including pre and post-market, and everything else before and after. And you have to get that balance right. But in breakthrough, because it's for life-threatening and it's for better outcomes, we're hoping, or more efficient outcomes, FDA will often approve that product to go on the market with greater uncertainty than it might otherwise. Perhaps we don't need as much data to get it on the market, recognizing that there is a data development plan that will capture that data in the post-market. Now, that's not such an easy thing to do, to capture data in the post-market, but we're developing a lot of issues. You didn't ask me this question earlier, and maybe we should talk about it. What are some of the major things that are happening? And one of them is the use of real-world evidence and real-world data in regulatory decision-making. So once a product's on the market, a lot of data then gets developed, and considering ways to capture that. And we have those ways being developed with our NEST program and what are called coordinated registry networks to capture that data and then bring it back to FDA and say, here's our post-market data. And by the way, while we were collecting post-market data in the real world, we've also collected health outcome data for payers, because payers are often very reluctant to provide coverage for breakthrough devices if it's put on the market with greater uncertainty. Payers don't like uncertainty, not at all, because they're putting out the money. FDA doesn't mind the uncertainty because we know that we will capture that data in the future, and we're still watching it before we, bless those products. So is it worth breakthrough if your product is for one of those conditions? Absolutely.
Thank you. Very helpful. And thank you for addressing that other question regarding trends. We're going to get more into that in a minute, in these last several minutes. I just want to go to Sham and Lena real quick, following on Murray's comments there again. Sham, you were a breakthrough company. Was there any additional burden or anything that you think people should know about? And again, would you do it over again if you had the chance?
Yeah, absolutely. Would do it over again in a heartbeat. In fact, this was our second shot. We were rejected the first time we applied for breakthrough. So rejection is not the end of the road here. I also saw that there was a comment in the chat about what kind of data do you need before submitting for breakthrough. The first time we submitted with like a very small pilot study in humans, although we were not dealing with something that needed like a lot of animal work and that sort of thing. And then the second time we submitted with one additional clinical study. So I think from my perspective, it was as much data as you can garner, not just from what you're doing, but also if there are other publications out there in the ether using the same, if it's a therapeutic, the same energy source, or the other studies. Basically, you're trying to make a well-reasoned scientific argument about why this is a reasonable chance of being better than the standard of care. And so the more you can pull in like real data from your own product, the better. But there, as I understand it, there's no like hard and fast rule, like it must be phase 1 or it must be phase 2. But yeah, I think in terms of the application and the process, to be honest, we did most of the application ourselves for the breakthrough. And by ourselves, I mean like the co-founders. So there's not really, I mean, this is like everything else at the FDA. You read through the guidance documents. If you have a question, you reach out and you ask them, for clarification on certain questions. It doesn't cost anything to like send an email and see if they respond. And then, you just go through the process. And if it doesn't work out, that's not the end of the road. You can try again when you have better data or a more convincing argument.
And just to clarify on that, maybe either Murray or Lena, maybe we'll start with Murray on this. Just to clarify, Murray, so what Sean was saying regarding this, the data you need to have to apply or to qualify for breakthrough device designation, you could have bench data or something, right? You don't have to have, you don't have to have animal or clinical or anything in particular. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And we accept. We will grant a breakthrough designation at any stage. And essentially, when we designate a device as breakthrough, it means that FDA believes that it has, here's the key word, the potential to provide for more effective treatment or diagnosis, but it may in fact have a limited data set. So you need to make the argument and make it in any way that you need, whether from animal, from bench, from literature, that this new approach that you have, first of all, meets the criteria, and second of all, has at least the potential to provide for more effective treatment.
Thanks, Murray. So we only have 5 minutes left in the live broadcast. So I'm going to move over now to kind of like wrap up at least this discussion from a general standpoint. There's so much more we could talk about and unpack, but we only have 5 minutes left. So I want to make sure everybody has a chance to give some closing thoughts, things that you think people should know, as Sham did before with entrepreneurs. If you're listening, here's what you should know, that kind of thing, or whatever you want people to know who are out there listening. And then we'll go into our Q&A where we can get into some more nuanced discussion. So I'm going to start with you, Lena. Again, from your experience and being involved in breakthrough, whether breakthrough, STEP, payer communication task force, anything you want to talk about, any last things you want people to know that they should be aware of, and could be tips, whatever you want, and then also, how can people find you after this if they're interested in getting in touch with you?
Sure. So I would say, summary sentence, be prepared for the evidence that satisfies the FDA to be very different from the evidence that satisfies commercial payers. And think about that through the economic lens, through the value lens, through the utility lens. I think that would sort of be the biggest learning. In terms of finding me, I'm on LinkedIn, like most of America, and my email is lena@alva1010.com. So great to, happy to connect with anybody on either of those platforms.
Excellent, Lena. Thank you for that. And thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited, you were part of this conversation. So let me move over then to Sham. So Sham, again, reflecting on all the stuff we've talked about, any other things that you're like, oh, wait, we forgot to talk about that. Is there something else that you would share, any tips of wisdom with people who are out there? And again, if people just want to get in touch with Avenda and learn about your breakthrough technology in the prostate cancer space, which is the first of its kind, as you said, in 40 years, I'd love to hear any closing thoughts from you, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, the only closing thought is, don't be afraid or be daunted by the process. Take it from somebody who, is entering a space with no reimbursement and very long clinical trials, and we're doing AI and robotics, and you're basically have, we took the hardest path you could possibly take, into a PMA, and it's possible. And so I would tell everybody else that there just be persevere through all of these challenges, because I think the FDA has made it very straightforward and simple, and I think better to take advantage of these new programs, and even if you don't know if it perfectly fits for your technology, again, reach out and get specific feedback from the FDA. My email is Shyam, SHYAM, @avendahealth.com, and happy to have a further conversation.
Thanks, Shyam. And now, Murray, you're going to get the final word, I'm going to let you give the final word also, again, with the mindset of kind of what you started to do before and talk about trends. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure that people out there know about, Murray? And then again, how to find you.
Well, thanks, Paul. First of all, I want to thank you and MedTech Innovator for hosting this and for providing the link between what we know to the rest of the medical device ecosystem that is eager to learn and we depend on to improve public health. I really won't be able to capture all of the newer things that we need to talk about in a short period of time, but what I do want to say, and this is an advantage of being on a web-based system, I'm not standing up in front of an audience, so everybody can put their tomatoes down when I say that I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That would be normally met by a throw of tomatoes, right? But we are, and we're normal people. We hope most of us are, and we're really here to help to improve patient help. And we don't create products, you do. We want to help you make a better product than you might otherwise. We want to improve the health of the American and worldwide public. And that's what we're here to do. And we're here to help you do it. So come early, come often. We're ready to go.
Well, you said it very well, Murray. I think that captures kind of the essence of all the discussions you and I have had over the years. And my experience in working with FDA is that kind of a mindset that we're here to help you make better products than you might have otherwise, and make sure that we're improving human health. I mean, that's really the goal of all this. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate that, the innovation that you've been leading over at FDA. And I know it's a ton of work. This is not easy to keep up with the technologies. I mean, because, these innovations are happening all over the world from thousands and thousands of companies. And you've got to keep up with the ability to understand that, to be able to make those decisions about what's safe and effective, and to say, hey, to recognize that these are technologies that it's not just about putting, our approving these products or clearing these products does not mean they're going to get used by the clinicians and others, and that patients are going to have access. There's more to it. There's payment. And even though we're not making that decision at FDA, we got to make sure that if patients are going to gain access, you're going to need that. So I appreciate all the work you're doing on the Payer Communication Task Force. I know it's been transformative, and for companies like Shyam and Shyam's at Avenda, and the companies that Lean has been working with at Alva 10. So thank you for doing all the work you're doing, Murray.
Thank you.
And other panelists, again, as we're closing up here, just want to thank you, Shyam. Thank you, Lena, for being with us today. For our cohort, you guys stick around. But Shyam and Lena, thanks for the conversation. You guys can unmute yourselves too, just real quick. Thank you for both being here.
Thanks for having me, Paul. It was so fun.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Shyam.
Pleasure.
All right,
Thanks,
so
Paul.
for those of you on YouTube, this is the end of the conversation for you, but you can certainly still post a comment in the YouTube video. We'll reply. If there's a contact you were looking for that we didn't provide the info, we'll provide you the info or a link or whatever you're looking for. For those of you at MedTech Innovator, stay on. We're going to have 30 minutes of Q&A with this great panel. For those of you on YouTube, go to medtechinnovator.org/live. That's where we have the schedule of all of these webinars. That's where we have the background information on the panelists, their bios, links, all those things. medtechinnovator.org/live. Hope you'll come back for future discussions. And thanks for being with us here.